from Massachusetts, Mr. Auchincloss, who is also the vice chair of the full committee, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Long hearing, almost done. As we've been in this hearing, the Fed announced a 75 basis point increase. The Fed chairman is channeling his inner Volcker and is committing publicly to using the full freight of monetary policy to reverse QE and rein in inflation. His greatest asset in this endeavor is going to be his credibility as an inflation fighter. By a show of hands, how many of you have confidence in the Fed's resolve through 22 and 2023 to pursue its mandate of price stability? That's a show of confidence from Wall Street in Governor Powell. The best way to reduce inflation, though, is to expand the productive capacity of our economy. Mr. Diamond, you said this in your remarks. That means raising labor force participation rates and perhaps most impactfully, building more housing. At the state and local level, that means pushing back on NIMBY opposition to multifamily housing in particular. At the federal level, what can government and big banks do together to help build more affordable housing, not just to finance it? Mr. Monahan, because our home state of Massachusetts is so crucially under the weight of housing costs, I'd like you to answer first, and anybody else can jump in.
So if you're talking about developers, first of all, the financing that we all do as an industry, the financing our company does, about $5 billion a year in housing, low-income, moderate-income housing, low-income housing tax credits. In terms of development, one of the perceptions is we got to create more development. So a group of my colleagues in Charlotte, we created $60 million of equity to go into more developers to close that gap. We're working in Boston to see if we can put together the same kind of program on the theory that there's a need to develop more developers who can do more work. But it's a universal problem, whether it's in Charlotte with 20, 30,000 housing unit shorts, Boston the same thing, New York City. Getting housing developments fast is critically important, but it's a multifaceted question which requires us to think about university housing, it requires us to think about kids that work for us in New York City housing, which is different from family housing, and it takes some thinking, and that's one of the planning cycle things you could help.
It takes some thinking, but most of all, it takes some building. I mean, in Massachusetts, we have created 2 jobs for every 1 unit of housing in the last 20 years, and you don't have to have the team of economists that you all have to understand what happens when you do that. Housing prices go up, and it's the single most important thing we can do in my home state to help people and working families in particular. The property market in the USA is way too tight, but in China, it's collapsing. Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy has been a catastrophe. The US economy has grown faster than the Chinese economy in the last year for the first time in my entire lifetime. Where can Capitol Hill and Wall Street collaborate to seize the initiative and outcompete the CCP for leadership of the world economy? Mr. Diamond, I'd love your thoughts to begin with.
Well, I think it's very important. We're kind of doing that a little bit with this, some of the bills, the CHIPS Act, et cetera. Faster permitting for grids, solar, wind power, hydroelectric power, building. Sometimes it's the coordinated thing. The building can't get built because the road can't be built, because the water's not being put in, because the grid's not being built. And getting our schools to more STEM teaching, which a lot of us are starting to do together. So there's a whole panoply of things that I think we know what they are, and there's a great list if we can send it to you too.
I'd appreciate that. One other person can jump in if they have a...
I think that earlier one of your colleagues mentioned investing in research, and what America has is the best research platform in the world, and that's where you win long-term. So you got to do a lot of things short-term, but long-term. And so in the CHIPS Act, the investment piece of that is as critical as the other pieces. Likewise, around the medical platforms, we just saw the miracle pulled off in the United States, and why we didn't have to have a zero COVID policy. So we can't forget research. The great research universities, labs, et cetera, have to be funded, and have to be funded in a way they can plan ahead and do the work.
And I'll note that it's not just the United States, it's Massachusetts leading the way on that biomedical research. And that with the CHIPS Act that we appropriated and authorized for the chips, but we did not appropriate for the science part of that bill. And we're going to have to continue to appropriate the money that we authorize in chips and science for biomedical research, and certainly I'll be committed to that. Mr. Diamond, in the last 30 seconds, a previous member of this panel impugned your motives relative to working class families, didn't give you a chance to respond as a courtesy. Do you want to respond in the last 30 seconds?
We all do a tremendous job taking our employees, trying to help our communities, lifting up impoverished communities, supporting things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, minimum wages, the CHIPS Act, Yeah, so that impugned me a little bit, and it was wrong. And so most of us care about our employees more than just about anybody else in our communities, and hopefully we demonstrate a little bit of that here today.
Madam Chair, I yield back.